Experience shows that the task of guiding others should be undertaken by someone who is equable and has no personal advantage in view. For such a person, having tasted stillness and contemplation, and begun in some measure to be inwardly at peace, will not choose to entangle his intellect with bodily cares. He will not want to turn it away from knowledge and drag it down from the spiritual to the material. This point is underlined in the well-known parable which Jotham told the men of Shechem. Once upon a time the trees went out to anoint a king over them. And they said to the vine, "Come and reign over us." And the vine said to them, "Shall I leave my wine, which cheers God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees?" Similarly, the fig tree declined because of its sweetness, and the olive because of its own good qualities. Then a bramble, a barren plant full of thorns, accepted the sovereignty which they offered, though it possessed neither a special good quality of its own, nor those of the trees that were to be subject to it. Judges chapter 9, verses 7 through 15. Now in this parable the trees which sought a ruler were not cultivated but wild. The vine, the fig tree, and the olive refused to rule over the wild trees, preferring to bear their own fruits rather than to occupy a position of authority. Likewise, those who perceive in themselves some fruit of virtue and feel its benefit refuse to assume leadership even when pressed by others, because they prefer this benefit to receiving honor from men. The curse which befell the trees in the parable also falls on these people who act in a similar way. "Let fire come out of the bramble," it says, "and devour the trees of the forest, or let it come out of the trees and devour the bramble." For when these people make a harmful agreement, inevitably it proves dangerous, not only to those who place themselves under an inexperienced teacher, but equally to the teacher who assumes authority over inattentive disciples. The teacher's ineptitude destroys the disciples, and the disciples' negligence endangers the teacher, especially when, because of his ineptitude, they grow lazy. For it is the teacher's duty to notice and correct all his disciples' faults, and it is the disciples' duty to obey all his instructions. It is a serious and dangerous thing, both for them to commit sins and for him to overlook them. Let no one imagine that to be a spiritual guide is an excuse for ease and self-indulgence, for nothing is so demanding as the charge of souls. Those who have charge of horses and other animals keep them under control, and so they generally achieve their purpose. But to govern men is harder because of the variety of their characters and their deliberate cunning. Anyone undertaking this task must prepare himself for a severe struggle. He must treat the faults of all with great forbearance, and patiently teach them things of which in their ignorance they are not aware. This is the reason why in the temple oxen support the basin for washing. 1 Kings chapter 7 verse 25. And why the whole candlestick was made of solid encased gold. Exodus 25 verse 31. Now the candlestick signifies that whoever intends to enlighten others must be altogether solid and firmly based, and have nothing about him empty or hollow. Everything in him which is superfluous and cannot serve others as an example of holiness must be cut away. And the oxen supporting the basin signify that anyone undertaking this work should not avoid what comes to him, but ought to bear the burdens and the defilement of those weaker than himself, so long as it is safe for him to do so. For if he is going to purify the actions of those who come to him, he must to some degree himself share their defilement, just as a basin of water, while cleaning the hands of those who wash, itself receives their dirt. For one who speaks about the passions and wipes others clean of their stain cannot escape undefiled, since the act of discussing them inevitably defiles the mind of the speaker. And even though he does not depict the sins in vivid colors, yet by speaking about them he stains the surface of his intellect.